Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Nomad World weekly series. I'm Becky, and I'll be your host. And today I'm going to be talking with Nic Hernandez about self storage around the world as a digital nomad. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey Becky, how you doing? Glad to be here.
I'm doing great. I've got part of Bonsko, where you make your home part of the year, behind me, but I was already telling you, not a place for self storage behind me. Perhaps not the best. You can tell me.
no, storing your things in the mountains may not be the best bet, but yeah, but it is beautiful. I recognized it right away. So
All right. Well, that's a good sign. And we're going to talk more about self storage here in a bit. But first, Nick, can you tell me about your background and how you started your digital nomad journey?
so I've been more or less like living abroad, kind of on the road for over 7 years now. Um, but I didn't really start as a digital nomad. So I started more as what you would consider like the classic backpacker or maybe expat. Um, So I started in Australia with a working holiday visa, knowing absolutely nothing about the whole backpacking scene and nomading in general. Going there thinking like, oh, I'll find like a full-time job and professional job and just move there. Went to a hostel and found out that people just travel and they go work these random jobs and I absolutely fell in love with that because I'm originally from the south of the U.S. and to those of you that don't know the South is a little more maybe conservative and people don't tend to travel as much. So there's not as much like internationals in the south of the U.S., right? So I never really grew up knowing about gap years and things like that. And yeah, so I started in Australia, then went to Malaysia, Southeast Asia, back to Australia, then lived in Germany for almost 2 years. Um, in between that time, I went to Malaysia and then I went to Ecuador for a bit, worked in the Bahamas on cruise ships um, through a subcontractor. So that was kind of a weird thing. And then went to New Zealand, then lived in Vietnam for almost, well, a little over a year, and then Mexico, and then Bansko, and yeah, and here I am.
What a journey. Wow. How long would you say of all those travels you have been a digital nomad?
Yeah, I was literally just about to kind of refine that answer. Um, so that's only been about the past 2 years, I would say. Um, so
Right.
it was like during the pandemic where I started to become like a what you would consider a digital nomad.
How would you define being a digital nomad? Is it when you start working while you're traveling?
I I guess so because I guess there's remote work and yeah, because sometimes you can search for remote work, but you have to be in a certain region. So I have friends like for example in the States and they can work remote, but they can't travel abroad. So they have to be in like a certain region of the US. Like you have to be on the East Coast or something. But you're not really allowed to work abroad. So I guess digital nomad would be remote worker with the ability to travel.
Thank you for making that distinction. I think some people do get confused by what that means. I do want to ask also of all those places that you mentioned, do you have any standout favorites? Bahamas, that
Mm.
sounded very good to me. I actually haven't been myself.
Yeah, so the Bahamas, unfortunately, I didn't get to spend as much time like enjoying the Bahamas because I was mostly on those cruise ships, like working, and doing like installation work. Um, so unfortunately, I don't have as much of, yeah, as many recommendations or an experience on the Bahamas itself. Uh, but for favorites, I think my all-time favorite is probably Vietnam. I absolutely, I love Vietnam as a country. I mean, the culture is just amazing. The food is unbelievably good. Just the value that you get, just quality of life and affordability is very nice. And yeah, and then you've got the mountains on one side and the beach on the other. So it's yeah, it's a really cool country, and I fell in love with it. So I think that would be my number one. And then Bansko in Bulgaria is definitely a close contender. So
For those of you listening, we have guides to both of these. Well, we have Hoi An, Vietnam, and Bansko on our channel. So check out the YouTube videos if you want more information. Thank you for helping us plug that, Nic.
yes, absolutely.
All right, so now we're going to jump into what you're doing now for your business. So, first of all, what attracted you to the self-storage space?
uh, yeah, so that's kind of it's a funny thing. Like for several years now, I've been wanting a little more stability. So the idea of like traveling around and seeing all these new places, it's great. But after you've been doing it for several years, it starts to get kind of, I don't want to say monotonous, but just tiring. And so the idea of having a home base was very appealing to me. Um, and I wanted to do this, um, but didn't necessarily want the upfront costs of like purchasing an apartment and then having to deal with the apartment. And I wasn't really sure where I would want to buy an apartment. I mean, it's, for the nomads who are listening, buying an apartment is a commitment. And we as nomads tend to shy away from commitments. And so so that's essentially how I came to this idea of creating like a self-storage business and getting into the space is that it's a way of being able to create a home base easily without all of the upfront costs and commitment um, of like purchasing an apartment. You can just store your things instead of having to constantly get rid of it or sell it each time you move to a new place.
So, for example, in Bansko, which is a ski town, you're thinking like you could store a snowboard or skis there, and it's like you have your apartment there, but you don't. It's just in the storage space, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So like I'm leaving for Vietnam soon, and I've rented out one of the ski lockers here, so I've got my snowboard, all my winter gear there. I'll be leaving a bunch of like clothing. I bought like an ironing board, some other things like that, right? That I don't want to just get rid of, and I'm just gonna store it there. And so when I come back, I'll have all these things, and I'll feel like I'm at home instead of having to like have a checklist of all these things I need to buy again or try to find.
It also sounds very eco-friendly.
I hope so. Yeah, instead of just constantly buying new things and getting rid of them, and so it is definitely nice to do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you could set up the perfect self-storage scenario for yourself, what would it look like? So first we've got the ski locker in Bonsko.
Yeah, yeah. So personally, like I was saying, like I really like Vietnam a lot, and eventually, like Bansko is my home base in Europe. I could see myself having another home base in Europe as well. Like Europe will probably be my more permanent home base. But ideally, I would love to have one in Vietnam as well. Um, and that could be like buying a motorbike and having my motorbike stored there, um, and just having all these different like kitchen appliances and things, and just storing that all there so that whenever I come back, I can have those things.
Yeah, I know the kitchen, it's always something digital nomads miss.
Yeah, and that's like you go to an Airbnb or you get to this like apartment, and then you open the drawer and it's like a scratched up like uh frying pan and knives that don't cut. And for those of you who like to cook, that could be very frustrating.
Yeah, I also wish like that the storage space had like a spice cabinet that everybody could just raid because always you have these spices, they don't last forever, but it's like when you open that drawer, you've got the rusty or the like scratched up frying pan and then no spices, not even oil
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, maybe salt.
Yeah. No, and also the winter clothes versus the summer clothes. I know I've heard it from other digital nomads. Like a lot
Yeah,
of people in Vietnam that I've met would say, "Oh, I really want to go to Japan, but that's a whole different wardrobe that I need, so I can't go." But with
yeah,
your solution, maybe you could have something stored either in Vietnam or Japan.
yeah, yeah, and eventually, I mean, this is a little more in the future, so I'm not, little teaser.
It's not
We're
available yet.
planning to. Yeah, it's not available yet, but we are working on it, is to provide kind of like transportation. So if you have something stored, for example, in Bansko, then we could then send that um, to somewhere in Europe. Right now, we're trying to stick to Europe just because internationally things get a little complex. But yeah, so the idea is to essentially have your things stored and then be able to then ship it to another location so that you can have it there. Um,
That would be phenomenal. It would solve a
yeah,
lot of problems for sure.
it would help me a lot too. So it's
I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs start because they had their own problems, right? And then they're going to help
yeah,
others. It's great.
yeah, yeah. No, I want to solve my problem.
All right. So with this, the original, like the small part of your business you have right now as the beginning, what is the pricing scheme for storing your things? Is this going to be more long term or short term?
Yeah, so this is more long term. There are many like short term options out there. So for example, like storing your things for a couple hours or maybe a day or two. And those are more like targeted towards tourists and stuff. Um, so the idea is that this is like a monthly payment. And we have had people like, for example, we've had someone in Bansko who just wanted to store their things for like a few days, and we've allowed that, but the minimum price is 1 month. So you just pay for the 1 month, and you can store it for maybe a few days if you need to. But we're aiming more towards like long-term storage than we are short-term.
Okay. Yeah, that would also keep things much more simple,
Yeah,
straightforward. Yeah, but
yeah, exactly.
you don't have to be on like longer term memberships. You can just do it month by month if you need to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's not, there's no like contract or minimum, like you don't have to book for a minimum of 3 months or 6 months. It's just you pay month by month, and then you come and pick it up whenever you'd like, and you can always extend the storage for however long you want. So
Great. Okay, so how would Global Stash is the name of your company? I don't think we've said that yet. Global Stash.
yeah,
So,
global stash.
so how would Global Stash work if I wanted to become a host and allow people to store their stuff?
So right now, like our target for hosts are mainly local businesses. So like co-livings or co-working spaces, especially just because they cater to nomads and expats, and our kind of primary audience or demographic for customers are nomads and expats, or travelers essentially. Um, but we also do have a host who's a local, like a homeowner, and so we are like open to working with like homeowners as well. Um, but essentially, the process is just um, me getting on a phone call with the person who would be interested in becoming a host, and then just talking about their space, like what does their space look like, how much space do they have, where are they located, just to see like what is the demand, what their pricing could be, and what kind of market is it, right? Is it in the mountains? Is there skiing or snowboarding? Is it by the beach? Is there going to be surfing or water sports? Is it in a big city? Are people going to want to store more things like furniture, or essentially just to get an idea of like how the space should be organized. Um, and then after that, we just go over kind of a contract, and revise that if needed, um, and then place the listing on the platform, and then they can start from there.
Okay, so on the platform, can I choose, like you were saying, I have to pay a minimum of a month, but can I choose on the platform directly, like how long I would want to keep my things? Or do you then put the host directly in touch with the customer and they kind of sort out when they're coming over with the stuff and when they're coming to pick it up, things like that?
Yeah, so right now the way it works is it's quite manual, and that's because uh, we just started it. Like, well, I essentially just started it in April, right? So it's still quite a new company. Um, and one is just to learn more about the customer and the hosts and the entire process. Um, and so I can understand a little more better, like the pain points, and just to have that connection. Um, Also, it's just to not try and automate everything and build all these things just to realize a month later that a lot of it needs to be changed. Um, so yeah, I don't want to spend too much time and energy and money into developing something that then changes completely in like a month or two time. So right now, with that being said, I went on a slight tangent. Um, it's very manual. So the customer gets in touch with me. I ask them, for how long, where do they want to store their things, um, and then once they give me that information, I can then pair them with a host that's most like if it's, for example, here in bond school, I would pair them with here the Hotel Avalon. Um, and then they talk to the host and they determine like when a good drop off time is and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad that you're not being bombarded too much with like all of that, intermediary communication. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's
yeah.
like a nice way of like they can then do like plan all those things, but then I just have the initial contact.
Okay. Do
Yeah.
you have any plans? I know it's really early days. Would you foresee creating an app in the future where people could log on and see what was available where or where the hosts were?
Yeah. So I'm actually developing at the moment I'm I'm starting to create a marketplace. So I'll have kind of like the website that people come and visit, the landing pages, things like that. But then when people actually want to book, um, there is a small shout out to this company. It's called Share Tribe. So they help you essentially create online marketplaces. So they have all the back end, and then you can essentially code and do the front end yourself. And so the idea is then to pair that with my website. And so people would be able to go on the website, create an account, look at availability, and make bookings that way, and then be able to connect and communicate with the hosts directly that way.
So someone can log on and say, I have a storage space. Would anyone like to store things? And then they get connected through that marketplace.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Sounds really straightforward eventually when it gets going. I know starting a
Yeah,
business
yeah,
is there's so many moving parts.
yeah, exactly. So that's the process right now is just working with people manually, and then once I get more of an idea, then it'd be nice to start automating things. But
Okay. And do you foresee, I don't know if this is something you would consider as part of the business, like a satellite part of the business, if the marketplace, if somebody starts saying, hey, I have a snowboard, would anyone like to use it for a fee while they're here in Bonsko? And then I'll put it back in my storage space or something like that.
yeah, I've you're not the first person to have asked me that. Um, so I do have like a backlog of ideas of additional services that I could add in the future. And that is one of them. That is definitely one of them that could work. Because for example, I don't think I'm gonna be in Bansko this winter. Um, highly unlikely that it will be. And so it might be nice to, like you said, rent out my gear while somebody is here. Um, so yeah, that would be nice. So in the future, very much so a possibility of that working out. So
I foresee like so much of my luggage costs being saved if I knew that like something was waiting for me at a certain point and I could rent it for a cheaper price than going. And also like when you get to a new place as well, you don't know where to get all of these things, right? That's such a challenge as a nomad.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially if it's like your first time somewhere. Um, and so it's like, which shop do I go to buy kitchen appliances, or where do I go to buy, you know, nicer clothing? Or I mean, you can always go to a big shopping mall, right? If you're in a big city, but you don't always have that option, or sometimes it's just, and shopping malls tend to be kind of not always the best value. So, like you said, sometimes it can be difficult to find things when you're in a new place and you're not really aware of the options.
Yeah. So I would be another vote for add that to your to the self-storage capabilities in the future. That'd be great.
Yeah, it's definitely like I said, you're not the first one to have asked that, so it's I think it's quite up there in the priority list. So
And you were saying you have a number of ideas that you've been brainstorming. Could you share any others that you think would be relevant that might be something in the future as to be part of the self-storage?
Yeah, so some of them, well, one was like the transportation, right? So being able to transport people's things from one location to another. Um, Another one that I'm trying to implement at the moment is just transportation. So, for example, in Bulgaria, if let's say you're in Plovdiv and we don't have a host in Plovdiv, you could then send your things from Plovdiv by going to Speedy, which is a courier service, a private courier service in Bulgaria. And then you can then send your things to one of our hosts, either in Sofia or in Bansko, and then they would then store those things there. Um, so that's one service that we're trying to experiment with and see if that's something that people would be interested in. Um, the renting and eventually maybe providing insurance as well. So that's one thing that uh, typically in like the self-storage industry, like whenever you store your things, there is no insurance included, right? So you have to have your own insurance in the case that there's a fire or something and your things got damaged. Um, they wouldn't be covered. And so what we might want to do in the future is also providing insurance to people who want to store their things as well.
Yeah, that would be great too, because I guess when it's a host that, you've vetted, but I've never met, maybe the host, something gets damaged or someone comes into their home and damages it or takes it and they didn't even know. So yeah,
Yeah.
insuring against those kind of things would be important.
Yeah, exactly. And there is like with the terms and conditions that we have, essentially like it protects the hosts from damage and theft as long as they're not responsible for it. Um, so if they can provide, like, for example, if a fire broke out in the building and it just happened because of, who knows, um, that's not necessarily the host's problem or their fault. And so they would then be protected. But if it was something negligent on the host part, like, for example, the room is supposed to be locked and they don't lock the room, and they just let people go into the room and use the things or whatever, then they would then be liable for that. Um, but the insurance part would definitely be nice to provide that for customers in the future.
Yeah, I feel like that would be really hard to prove if it was locked or not, right? It's like, how would we be able to check? That's tough. That's tricky.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's yeah, there are things that need to be taken in good faith, and that's another reason why I'm trying to stick more to local businesses, um, because there's just more trust there. Uh, they already have been running a business, they already have reviews, and so there's a little more trust as opposed to just leaving it with a random homeowner.
Yeah, I know there's all kinds of different people that might try to store their things, but some people I'm sure will be the type that will have every single thing locked and tracking devices, air tags, maybe, and
Yeah,
whatever you need to take that risk to try this service. But I feel it's in some ways not that different from Airbnb when you personally go in to store yourself in a stranger's home. It's
yeah,
like, well, that's a risk as well, but this is your stuff and
yeah,
maybe it feels like it's more vulnerable because you're not with it. But
yeah, yeah, exactly. So there's definitely some things that would be nice to uh, add in the future to help like mitigate that, make people feel more comfortable with it. But the one that we're trying to do right now is, as I said, like work with local businesses, so there is a little more like a little more trust with that process. So
so, Nick, are you planning to expand self storage to Vietnam since you're planning a trip there soon?
that would be amazing. And we will see. Yeah, I'm definitely very excited to try and do that. Actually, as you know, I was in Portugal recently, and there is a possibility. So this is possibility. Nothing is confirmed yet, but maybe opening another two locations there. Um, so that would be very nice. But Vietnam is definitely a place I would love to open a location. Uh, one for the business, but also for my own selfish need of wanting to store my things in Vietnam. So, so
Where it
yeah,
starts as an
we'll see.
entrepreneur, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's what I'm going to try and do when I get to Vietnam. Is try to open a few locations there, or at least work with partners who I could then do that with.
I definitely think there is a need for this, or and a want as well from so many nomads. I just hope that, there's a way we can start adding the sharing component or the renting component as well, because I know there will be people who would say like, oh, you just need to be a minimalist and you can't, just don't travel with so many things. But it's not always that straightforward, especially if you have digital nomads with families and things like that.
Yeah, and especially if you've, like I said, I mean, obviously some people can do this for years and years and do the whole minimalist lifestyle, but at a certain point, like we said earlier during the call, like once you've cooked your 1,200th meal on a scratched up pan and with bad knives and things like that, and you like to cook, I mean, it's nice to just have those things, like some of those comforts, right? Um, so yeah.
For sure, for sure. And I know you mentioned you wanted to have multiple bases, and I think like this is some people will say like, wow, that's such a luxury, that's amazing, you can do that, but there's so many different ways to live the nomad life, and it doesn't always have to be super expensive. But I think in these days, it's becoming a good idea to have another place you could go to, or another place where you have some things, because you never know what's going to happen with weather circumstances. And, I personally love knowing that there's different cities I can go to. I have friends there and I can stay and set up a bit of things
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it is. It's really, really nice to have those options.
Yeah. So I am wondering if there's anything else that you would like to share with us before you go.
Ooh, I'm trying to think of anything that I would want to share additionally.
Is there anything I did
Uh,
not ask you that you wanted to highlight?
yeah, no, I think we went over a lot of what I wanted to talk about. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
I have one last random question about self storage. I don't even know if this happens, but what do you do if someone drops like a bunch of things off and then just like never comes and gets them and they're taking up your space?
Okay, so that's like in the terms and conditions, we essentially like anyone who drops off their things has to agree to our terms and conditions. And this depends. If the person is continuing to pay for it, then no problem. But if they decide like they just kind of disappear off the face of the earth and they don't pay for their monthly subscription, we'll obviously send them a few times like, hey, it's overdue. You need to pay. And then if that doesn't happen, or if they just send us a message and saying like, hey, uh, I don't want to pay anymore. I don't want those things. Essentially, what the host can do is either discard those things, like just dispose them, or if they're valuable things, then they can decide to sell them if they want to. So if it's like somebody who's left their snowboard or ski equipment and they they just don't want it anymore, then the host can decide to sell that off if they want to.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. If they sign the terms and conditions, it's good to know
Yeah.
what's going to happen.
So it's yeah. So that's something like just to prevent somebody from just disappearing and then it's like, okay, now we have these things. What happens with them?
Yeah, and it prevents more storage in that space. So if people want to follow you or follow Global Stash, where can they go?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Like at the moment, there's not many socials for Global Stash. So we do have a Facebook page. Um, and it's just called, if you search up Global Stash, you'll see it as a page on Facebook. Um, Besides that, I'm trying to think of personally. I do have an Instagram, although I don't use it as much as I don't know if I should say as much as I should, but I'm just not as active as I used to be. So people could follow me on Instagram as well. Um, I think I have that as Nico Nomad Travel. See,
We will
that
put
shows
the
you how much
links as well.
we'll do the
When
thing.
this
Yeah,
gets
just
released, we'll put the links.
yeah.
Maybe
I
by
mean,
then you'll have an Instagram handle for Global Stash if you want, but we will
yeah,
put any links that are available when this gets uploaded. They will be there
yes,
in the
exactly.
description.
No, perfect. Because yeah, at the moment it's we just mainly have a Facebook page and we're not doing much more on other socials.
All
And then the
right.
website.
Yes, the website is very important. And we will
Yeah,
link to that as well.
perfect.
Well, Nic, thank you so much for going deeper into this topic. As we've said, it's something that nomads do think about as they start traveling more and more or decide to start traveling slower in different climates, different parts of the world. So good luck growing GlobalStash. I really hope it becomes the open the app and store.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully. We'll see. We'll see soon enough. So
All right. All right. Thank you again, Nic, for the interview.
awesome. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.